So welcome back, and now we're going to look at the final lesson when it comes to this entire topic about Ireland from 1870 right up to 1914. And this is the year we're going to focus on, the year of crisis, which is 1914. And what's really interesting is that in the course I use this as the cut-off point for one major reason. It's the year that Home Rule is supposed to be passed, and then it doesn't get passed because of the outbreak of World War I. So let's look at where Ireland was going right the way up into this, as well as a little bit of a look about where Ireland went next. So as September 1914 approaches, both sides are anxious, and for good reason, because they have built up like their own kind of either pro or con to the Home Rule Bill, that it was very difficult for any of the sides to take any sort of a step back. When you have 100,000 people drilling openly and 500,000 people signing the Solemn League and Covenant, how can you turn around to those people and say, actually, no, we're just going to accept Home Rule? And at the other side of things, how could you say to the people who supported the Home Rule movement all the way through at the very end, actually, it's only going to be Home Rule for part of Ireland, we're going to leave Ulster out? Really difficult for both sides to take a step back, because the Buckingham Palace Conference during the summer of 1914 got all sides around the table to see could some sort of compromise be made. And this shows how effective both sides were, but especially Carson was, because to actually get Asquith to do this shows how afraid Asquith was of actually passing this. So Carson understood that Home Rule would probably pass. He understands that this is the political situation that he's in, but he wants to make sure that the passing of this Home Rule Bill will be as awful for Ireland as possible, because he wanted, whether it's immediately repealed or if the whole process doesn't work, what will happen next. He wants to bring it down. And what happens is this starts a tradition in Ireland of Protestants in the north trying to bring down political institutions. We'll see this in the Sunningdale Agreement later on when we look at the Ireland Topic 5 section of Northern Ireland. But that's the whole point. He wants to keep Ulster in the Union. He's willing to say, okay, I'm willing to say, let's bring in Home Rule, but let's keep Ulster out of that, and we can rule ourselves. Maybe we get our own type of Home Rule and let the Catholics in the south have their kind of Home Rule. But Redmond would not agree to this. For him, it's Home Rule for all of Ireland. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. You have the political reason of you don't want to see Ireland partitioned, which is, again, pretty much what causes the Civil War in the early 1920s in Ireland, which is, again, literally 8 years after this. We're not talking a whole heap of time afterwards. The idea of partitioning Ireland, and politically and kind of socially, it isn't what people want, especially in the south. It is kind of what people have come to accept in the north, but in the south it's still a no. But the other reason is economically. Without Belfast in Ireland, you're losing a huge chunk of your economic wealth from the country. So it makes sense for Redmond, both politically and economically, to keep the north of Ireland in this whole kind of Home Rule sphere. So with both sides armed, as we saw with the Irish Volunteers and the Ulster Volunteer Force, it looked like civil war is looming, that there's a civil war on the way. So what does that mean for Ireland? It means that if you pass Home Rule, will there be open battles? Will both sides line up on a field, just like the Battle of the Boyne that was kind of 400 years or 300 years previously? Will that kind of thing happen again? Will streets, will there be street fighting as people go from house to house, like there would be during the Easter Rising only 2 years after this? Nobody is quite sure, and both sides are very worried about it, especially after the Curragh Mutiny. Now, the Curragh is today known as a racecourse, but back then it was known as an army base. And in this army base, you had the British army that would be there. And a mutiny is when you refuse to follow your orders that are given to you by your commanders. This doesn't usually happen in the British Army, and if there's ever a sort of mutiny, the results afterwards are usually really harsh and terrifying. There can be executions, there can be imprisonments, there could be punishments, such as like whipping. All of these things happened during a mutiny previously in the British Army. Not this one. This one's a little bit different because Carson showing his effectiveness again because he has a say over army policy. And you're going to say, well, how is Carson going to say over army policy? Well, the people who are in the army support Carson, so therefore they will follow along with what Carson actually wants. Because the army said that they would refuse to fight the UVF if a conflict occurred. They didn't say anything about the Irish Volunteers now, but they said if the UVF decided to drill openly and then engage in, let's say, military conflict in Ireland against the powers of Home Rule, that they would support it tacitly by not getting involved. Now, imagine that they have the thousands of British Army soldiers in Ireland that are going to refuse to engage a physical, kind of group, a militant group who are going against the will of the British government. That is a huge kind of act in Ireland at this time, and it shows just how good of a leader Carson was, that he could get the army to do that because of the campaigning he had done, especially since 1912. And then the army itself had fired on civilians in Dublin during the Howth gun running. So the army had shown that they've no problem firing on civilians in Dublin after they couldn't find the people who brought in the guns, but asked them to go against these also illegally armed Protestants in Ulster, and they say no. So this is where Ireland is right the way up as far as September 1914. It looks like the passage of the Home Rule Bill probably will happen at this time, and that civil war is going to happen. And even if Asquith doesn't pass Home Rule, you also have the armed Irish Volunteers who would probably set up an uprising as well because Home Rule wasn't brought in. So Asquith's in a really tough situation, and what saves him and what saves the United Kingdom from a civil war is the beginning of World War I. With this, the Home Rule Bill is delayed. Now, people don't know how long the war is going to go for. It can be detrimental to historians, if you look at history from now backwards. We know that this war is going to last over 4 years and it's going to be devastating for all of Central Europe, and empires will fall because of this and whole generations of people will be wiped out. Yet people at the time are told she'll be home by Christmas. So with that in mind, this is just put on the medium term. It's not put on the long term, it's put on the medium term. We'll sort out the war first and we'll see where it goes. And this is where it gets quite interesting in terms of trying to show your loyalty to the cause. Because Carson is happy and he supports the war. And he says, yes, what better way to show that you support your king than by joining the war effort? And a lot of us that volunteer force members immediately sign up to the war, and will sign up to the war over the course of the 4 years because they support their king and they support their country and they support they support the union, and they want to show how loyal they are to the union. And then Redmond does something similar because Carson's policy is popular with unionists up the north. Redmond's policy, that what he decides to bring in, is not popular with everybody. It's one of those 50-50 policies that some people agree with and some people disagree with, which then puts Redmond in a difficult position because Redmond's effectiveness would wane after this. Because remember, this course goes right the way up to 1914, so you can talk about this part here. He splits the Home Rule Party and the Volunteers and the Irish people by supporting the war. And you say to yourself, well, hang on, how can Redmond, who's looking for Home Rule, support a war that the British Army is in, that the King is in? I think if you think of it like that, you're mixing up two really important things. You're mixing up what Home Rule nationalism is and what republicanism is. Home Rule nationalism says that we are a part of the United Kingdom, we just rule ourselves. So to show how much we are a part of the UK and how loyal we will be to the UK and to the King, we should go fight in this war because we're just as part of the UK as anybody else. Whereas a lot of people who see Home Rule as a stepping stone to a republic, or IRB members themselves, they're going, there's no way we're sending people to Europe to die or fight for the king. And now you have a problem, because Redmond wants to keep on good terms with the Liberals, which is fair enough because he needs the Liberals to pass it. And if it looks like at the end of this war that the Home Rule Party hadn't been supporting the war and hadn't been telling their people to go and fight the war, well then that'd look really bad on the Home Rulers. But this means that he loses track of what the Irish people want. There's many volunteers who actually go and they are killed in this battle, and some of them return, and they return different people. Like pre-1916, the people who returned after the war were nearly treated as heroes. Post-1916, when they came back from the war, they were not treated as heroes. They were treated really badly, and some of them are even blacklisted because of the change in fortune and the change in politics in Ireland from 1916 onwards. And the people who don't go, they're mainly the Republicans, because they're never going to go fight this war anyway. And now we're getting into the kind of the post section. So in an essay, I wouldn't go mad into this, but it's something you can mention maybe in a conclusion. As the war drags on, nationalism changes, republicanism grows, the idea that Ireland should rule itself becomes really important, especially after the 1916 Rising. And not necessarily the Rising itself, but it's the British response to the Rising which changes public opinion of what actually happened. After the Rising, Redmond failed to lead the party into this new wave of public feeling. He stays with the idea of Home Rule, but the Home Rule ship has sailed. If it had passed in 1914, maybe the people of Ireland would have been happy with this. Maybe there would have been a Republican fervour afterwards to push it on like a stepping stone. Maybe there's a civil war, but it doesn't pass. And the people of Ireland, by the end of this, want something different. And it means that in the 1918 general election, the Home Rulers are wiped out. They go from over 70 seats down to about 6. And who gets those seats? Sinn Féin. Ireland has changed. Ireland wants to be independent, and that's what leads to the War of Independence from 1919 to 1921. Thanks for listening to this section of the course. When we looked at these two leaders, we're talking about two effective leaders in the run-up to 1914, yet one of them falls at the final hurdle, but it's nothing to do with his own tactics to do with Home Rule. It's to do with geopolitics. It's to do with the war in Europe. And that happens in the next section of the course, so we don't necessarily have to worry about it here. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next section. Goodbye.